Have you watched The Devil in the Family? Well, if you haven't, you really need to. And we're going to talk about it, so spoiler alert. So I watched the new docu-series, The Devil in the Family. If you haven't heard, it's all about the Ruby Franke case. And I thought it was really good, and I'm going to share my thoughts on it. But first, I'm going to do a really quick recap on what happened in this case, and I'm going to try and make it as quick as possible because I have covered this case before. You can go and watch my old videos. I think it was one of the first videos I ever uploaded to this channel. But if you feel like you know enough about the case, you can go on ahead and skip to the timestamp down at the bottom. Chad Franke is just a mischievous teenager, and he is playing a prank on his little brother. He wakes his little brother up at like 2 a.m. and he tells him, "We're going to Disneyland." His little brother R, so excited, packs his suitcase, makes his bed, and he's all ready. And then Chad breaks it to him. It was just a prank. Obviously, his little brother was upset and crying a little bit. But I guess it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just a bit of fun between siblings, you know, just a bit of teasing. But his mom found out about it. You don't want Ruby finding out that you're playing a prank on your sibling like that, because even the smallest thing can get you into the biggest trouble in this Mormon household. Ruby finds out that Chad played this prank on his little brother, and Chad's laughing about it. So Ruby decides a suitable punishment for this would be to take away Chad's bed. Not for a day, not even for a week, not for a month. No, for 7 months.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October. And they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom. I think so. I think this is the reason. At least this is the reason that's been in my head. It's pretty funny, but now that I look back, I mean, it's pretty depressing.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke Russell up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack. And he got up and made his bed all neatly and then packed all his clothes in a suitcase. And then he walked out the door and I'm like, "Russell," he was like, "What?" And he's all happy. Has his sunglasses on.
And then there's little E. She forgot to bring her lunch to school today, and she's hungry. E was only 6 years old at the time. And her teacher decided to text her mom Ruby to ask her to just bring a lunch over to school. But Ruby is angry. E has done this so many times, and she knows she's responsible to pack her own lunch for school. She's just going to have to go hungry. It's tough love, baby, even if that makes the teacher feel uncomfortable.
I just got a text message from Eve's teacher, and she said that Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? This happens quite often when you're raising children. I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch, and it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry. And hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
I swear the way she says uncomfortable scares me to death. But these are just 2 examples out of many to give you an idea of the parenting style of Ruby Franke. And why do we know this and even have clips of it? Well, it's because Ruby and her husband Kevin Franke started a family vlogging YouTube channel called 8 Passengers, and they had millions of subscribers. Ruby and Kevin have 6 kids, hence the name 8 Passengers. Now just imagine, as a kid, waking up every morning with a camera in your face. I can tell you right now, my son would not be happy to do that. And neither would I. I mean, how is it okay to be making money off of your child? Something about that just doesn't sit right with me. But this is how Ruby and Kevin's kids had to live day in and day out. And you best believe if there was an embarrassing moment, or if they were sick, or if they had to be punished, it was filmed. But viewers very quickly started to realize that something was off, and they started calling Ruby out on how she was parenting her kids. They felt the punishments the kids received were completely overboard, and kudos to those viewers who called her out on it. Some even went as far as to report her to CPS, but it seemed like nothing ever came from that. However, the more criticism Ruby received, the less she started uploading, and then one day she just stopped completely. And all of a sudden, 8 passengers was gone. And nobody really knew why, although people had their suspicions. But Ruby was now out of the spotlight. That is until 30 August 2023. A 911 operator receives a disturbing call from a man who lives in Ivins, Utah. He tells the operator that a 12-year-old boy just knocked on his door looking for food. He described the state of the child and, well, listen for yourself.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and we know there's been problems at this neighbor's house. He's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty.
Okay. Is your door locked?
No, I'm sitting outside with him on the front patio.
Okay, cool.
And he asked us to call the police. His ankles are taped up, and he won't tell us why.
Okay.
But he has duct taped around each ankle. Yeah, there's sores around him. I think there's a good chance he's been... Oh, and he has them around his ankles. I mean, his wrists as well. Okay, this boy has been... This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
Okay. Let's get the paramedics headed.
The 12-year-old boy was little R, Ruby Franke's youngest son. But what was he doing in Ivins, Utah? Because Ruby, Kevin, and their kids lived in Springville. Well, he escaped from Jodi Hildebrandt's house. Who the hell is Jodi Hildebrandt? For that, we need to go back. Chad, Ruby's second oldest, has been expelled from school. Absolutely devastating to his parents, Ruby and Kevin Franke. What were they going to do with him? This just confirmed what Ruby feared all along. There was something wrong with Chad, and he needed stern guidance. And this is where Jodi Hildebrandt enters the story. Ruby enlisted the help of Jodi to help guide her out-of-hand son Chad onto the right path. Jodi, also a devoted Mormon, was a counselor, and up until around 2012, the LDS Church would refer many of their members to Jodi for counseling. Why did they stop? Because in 2012, Jodi's license was put on probation after she shared personal and confidential information of one of her clients with not only the LDS Church, but also Brigham Young University. But Jodi still continued with her work. She was the founder of a non-profit named Connections. Connections was a relationship and business counseling company, and Ruby felt that Jodi could definitely help Chad. The problem was, the more Jodi spoke to Chad, the weirder things got. Cherie, the oldest of the Franke siblings, started to notice the devastating effect Jodi was having not only on her brother, but her whole family. Slowly but surely, Jodi wormed her way into every part of the Franke family, with Ruby's urging. Then one day, out of the blue, Ruby announced that Jodi was battling dark spiritual forces and needed their help. She was going to move in so they could take care of her. This was a bizarre situation, which resulted in Ruby eventually going to her husband Kevin and telling him that she would now be sleeping in the room with Jodi because she needed to be there for her friend. She needed to comfort her. Ruby and Jodi were getting way too close. This carried on for weeks, and Cherie had to sleep in the lounge because she had to give her bedroom to Jodi, and she was suspicious of Jodi from the get-go. But she was just biting her tongue because she knew that within a few weeks, she would be moving out of the house and going to university. The glorious day soon arrived where Cherie could pack her things and move out of the household that had felt like a mental prison for so many years. But not too long after she moved out, she received a call from her dad, Kevin. Kevin shared with her that Ruby had invited him to leave the home. She wanted to separate for at least a year, because Jodi said Kevin was selfish and he needed to go and work on himself for at least a year. Within that year, he was to have no contact with Ruby or any of his children. So he asked Cherie not to contact him. Chad was also kicked out. He also had to work on his selfish ways and repent, and was also not to have contact with his family. But Kevin and Chad agreed. Jodi was right. They were selfish, and they didn't deserve the luxury of family. Almost a year later, on the 30th of August, 2023, Kevin would hear from his wife, Ruby, for the first time. She phoned him in a panic. She told him that their 2 youngest kids were at the police station, but he had to know something. They were possessed, and he should not believe anything they say. Oh, they are probably telling the police so many lies. You see, R had gone to the neighbor who phoned 911, and then R told the police that his little sister E was still in Jodi's house. So they went and got her. But Kevin just needed to go and get them. Kevin was shocked and immediately drove to fetch his children. But when he arrived, he was told that his kids were abused by not only his wife, but by Jodi Hildebrandt. Kevin at first struggled to believe this. He was in such shock. Ruby and Jodi were arrested and charged with 6 counts of child abuse. They eventually pleaded guilty to 4 counts, and both were sentenced to up to 30 years behind bars. Now let's talk about this new docu-series, The Devil in the Family. Episode 1 immediately starts off with the footage of little 12-year-old R after he escaped, knocking on the door to ask for help from the man who phoned 911. And instantly I started to cry. In the footage you can see how the bones are protruding from this little boy's body, and it is so upsetting. One of the things that really hit me hard immediately was seeing all the footage of Ruby, Kevin and the kids, and what a beautiful family this was and how amazing they could have been. And I felt a pain in my heart for what I could see on the screen, this beautiful family that Ruby Franke abused and threw away. Kevin Franke in this docuseries, honestly my emotions go up and down with him. He is a passive and submissive man, a man who goes with the flow and very much followed his wife's lead. But I get so angry because I feel like, hey, if there's ever a time to grow a backbone, it's when your wife is treating your kids like crap. I mean, come on, it's like Ruby had him by the balls 24/7. He mentions in the first episode that he was very uncomfortable with being filmed all the time and the kids being filmed all the time, and I completely get it. In fact, I feel family vlogging just needs to be banned. I think it's very harmful. But Kevin did not fulfill his duty as a father and a husband here, because a real man would have stepped up and would have put a stop to this, or at the very least put boundaries in place that would have protected his family. And I'm just thinking about my husband. I mean, my husband would have shut that down so quickly if he had just heard me shouting at my son because he's making too much noise or he's not acting the way I want him to act for a video. He would have immediately told me I have lost my mind and that we would not be doing that. And I believe that's important in a family unit. We need to check each other. And something very important too is to have your priorities in the right order. YouTube can never be more important than the well-being of your children. And these poor kids had to act out their entire lives in front of the camera every single day. But Kevin said that Ruby wanted to be seen as the best mother. And I thought that was a very interesting choice of words. She didn't want to be the best mother. No, she wanted to be seen as the best mother. And that says a lot about Ruby. She needed and wanted that validation. Oh, and I have to share this part because Kevin was talking about how he found a list, and this was before they ever got married. But Ruby made a list of everything that she wanted in a husband one day. And at first I was thinking, there's nothing really so strange about this because, I had a sort of list, I never wrote anything down, but I always knew that I wanted to have a God-fearing man and that he had to love animals. Because, if he didn't love animals, it would not work, But Ruby's list was different. It was detailed, okay? She had on there what he had to smell like, the height he had to be, what he had to look like. And it was a lot.
I'm looking for a man in finance with trust fund. 6'5",
blue eyes. And Kevin actually goes on to say that he studied this list, and he wanted to be that for her. He changed himself to be what she wanted. And that's really strange to me, because he had to go and change himself so that she would see him as the perfect husband. And this is just an assumption, but I think that Ruby was looking for a passive man, someone that she could walk over, because she's got this strong personality and she definitely has control issues. So she wanted a man that would just go along with what she wanted. And Kevin was perfect for that role. One of the most insightful things about this docuseries was to see some of the filming that took place for 8 Passengers. And they showed parts that Ruby edited out. There's this one part where they are filming and Ruby is sitting next to Kevin and she is talking about subscribers who asked her to let the kids sing Christmas carols. And she gets upset because Kevin is not jumping in. He's not acting for the camera the way she wants. And Ruby's reaction to that really scared me. You could see it on her face. Her face literally just dropped. And Kevin, being as passive as ever and wanting to please Ruby, says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll jump in. I'll say this." And then he sort of just takes over to make everything better and to please her. And you actually get to see her face go from like this to this for the camera. And I was like, wow, this woman is scary. But it's just so crazy to see it because it gives you this understanding of what Ruby was really like in regards to filming. And it also gives you a better understanding of what Kevin was like with Ruby. And then they share the footage of how filming went with the kids for 8 Passengers behind the scenes. And this enraged me. I mean, it is shocking how she treated the kids. And you can just see very clearly how she forced them to act, for the viewers. And she wanted them to act a specific way. And if they didn't, she would get so angry. Like, for example, if she's filming and she hears a noise in the house, she starts shouting. She's like, "Hey, I'm filming in here." And she does it so aggressively.
Hey, I'm still recording!
And I'm thinking, Ruby, you have 6 kids. There's bound to be noise in your house, okay? But then there's this one part where her youngest daughter makes a noise or starts talking while Ruby is filming. Ruby's talking to the camera. And I got so upset because Ruby actually takes her hand and slaps it over this little girl's mouth. And she actually squeezes her face. And she's like, "You sit down." And she's just, it's awful to watch that. Then literally right after that clip played in the docuseries, they asked Kevin, "Did you know about this?" And he goes, "No, I never knew that was going on in my family." And my husband and I were looking at each other and we're like, "We just saw you with a cameraman when she was filming and she grabbed that little girl's face. I mean, you knew." Then they show this clip of Ruby filming with Chad and Chad's not acting the way she wants. So she starts getting really upset with him and she actually tells him, "Fake being happy." And this poor boy, I feel so sorry for him, but he actually tells her, he says, "I don't know if I can right now." And that just broke my heart. And Kevin actually admits in this docuseries that after the first good paycheck, he really started to jump on board with this YouTube channel thing. And I get it. It's my passion. I love it. I wish I could do it full time, but unfortunately, I'm not there yet and I'm too poor at the moment. But the difference between me and Ruby is that I'm not parading my child around in front of the camera for viewers. Another thing that really caught me off guard was that Kevin said he actually was living through Chad vicariously. Chad was what Kevin always wanted to be. Good looking, good at sports. He has all this charm, and Kevin admits that they exploited that. And I was like, wow, okay, I struggled to even imagine my son getting a girlfriend one day, and they are doing that? What were they thinking? But their income from YouTube kept on rising and rising. And he shares that at their peak, they were earning over $100,000 a month from their 8 Passengers channel. And that is where they became hooked. They were very focused on that. And unfortunately, not on the well-being of the children. But behind the scenes, worse things were even going on because Chad also shares that Ruby used to beat him badly with a belt. And Cherie corroborates this. She says Chad's beatings were horrible, and she even had to help him clean off blood off the walls. And it's just disturbing to hear that. But that happened way before Jodi came along, which tells me one thing. Ruby was a monster before Jodi ever came into the picture. Jodi just made it worse. But Kevin insists that Ruby started off by wanting to do this to showcase what a happy Mormon family looks like, and she wanted to use her channel to attract more followers to the LDS faith. Now, Mormons very much believe in going on missions all the time and are constantly trying to recruit more people to their church, and they are encouraged to actually document their lives for future generations of Mormons, normally in journals. But now, YouTube has come along, and a large part of family vlogging channels are actually made up of Mormons because they have lots of kids and they want to lure people to the LDS church. It was also funny for me to hear what Ruby's neighbors actually thought of her. They actually say that she wasn't really friendly and she was always filming, and it was very clear to them that the YouTube channel was her #1 priority. And they also say that they were concerned about the content she was putting up because they saw like she was putting up things about her teenagers going into puberty and some really personal things about the kids, and they thought it was really inappropriate. The neighbors also really didn't appreciate the fact that Ruby was always filming outside and she was filming their houses and neighborhood in the background, and they just felt exploited and they didn't appreciate it. Now I want to talk about Cherie, the oldest of the kids, the one who wrote the book called The House of My Mother. I read it and Cherie did a fantastic job with this book. I highly recommend it. But in there, she talks about how the channel was exciting, but she basically says it became like work, and that's when things really started to get worse. The children started resenting Ruby, especially the older ones. And then Chad got expelled from school, and Ruby felt he needed some therapy, and that's where Jodi first started appearing in their lives. And this was also happening at the time that 8 Passengers was sort of falling apart. And Kevin said at this point, Ruby felt like she was looking for something new. And unfortunately, Jodi ended up being that something new. This Jodi, this woman, she just gives me a pain in the you-know-what. When Jodi got involved with the Franke family, at first there were some positive changes in Chad and actually in Ruby too. But then the crazy rules were enforced. Chad was sent to a wilderness camp. He wasn't allowed to play sports anymore. He was being punished in crazy ways. And the clip we showed in the beginning of this video was basically the clip that made the channel come crashing down, according to Kevin. Subscribers recognized that this punishment of letting the boy sleep on a beanbag for 7 months was extreme, and they started going through her other videos and found many more instances where Ruby's punishment for her kids were cruel. 8 Passengers was basically cancelled after that episode of Chad losing his bed, and the Frankes lost 90% of their income, according to Chad. The Frankes actually got a lawyer to help them navigate this tricky situation, and the lawyer's advice to Ruby was to make a video where she actually apologizes to her audience. And just as a typical narcissist would do, Ruby's response was, "Over my dead body." She wasn't sorry for the way she parented her kids. But what the public didn't know at the time was that Jodi was involved at this point. And surprise, Ruby took the video down. But the damage was done. The internet sleuths were on top of this, and Kevin shares in the docu-series that this devastated Ruby because the internet attacked her. Jodi and Ruby became extremely close, and I mean close. Ruby then decided that she wanted to start working with her. Jodi was the owner of Connections, remember? And she basically built up a community within Connections. But wait, let me call it what I want to call it. She formed a cult. Connections was a cult, in my opinion. And oh boy, was Jodi good at what she did. She reeled people in, especially women. I wonder why. Jodi also always seemed to be angry towards men in general, but Ruby really wanted her help. She really believed in what Jodi was doing. She one day also took Kevin with her to one of the Connections conferences, and Kevin actually told Ruby, "This is a cult." And I was like, yes, Kevin, you've got it. But unfortunately, he didn't stick with that. And of course, Ruby didn't agree that this was a cult at all. No, Ruby loved sessions with Jodi. She felt like Jodi was helping her to get back on track. Ruby got involved with connections and she was now training under Jodi to become a type of life coach or something. And it wasn't long until she went to her husband Kevin and said she was worried about their marriage and she wanted him to join a connections men's group. Supposedly this would help their marriage. And Kevin did this to please his wife. But Jodi was definitely not in the business of helping or fixing marriages. Let me tell you my opinion on Jodi. I think she is attracted to women, but she can't openly live that way because of her faith. Mormons are not allowed to be gay. So Jodi is sneaky. She comes with an angle of therapy, but she indoctrinates wives, turns them against their husbands, and eventually convinces them to divorce. And that's exactly how the pattern played out with Ruby too. And now we're going to move on to something that I found to be hilarious, because in May of 2020, Jodi was claiming that she was being attacked by demons. Her house was haunted. And Kevin and Ruby fell for this hook, line, and sinker. They believed her and they invited her to come and live at their house. And listen, I went from crying in the beginning of this docuseries to laughing so hard. I mean, I was on the floor because Jodi was acting possessed. I mean, that was not real at all. And when I saw my husband's face when he was watching it with me, I was just laughing even harder. It was so ridiculous. Jodi is seriously not well in her head, but Kevin and Ruby bought this. I mean, they would be praying over her and trying to get rid of these demons that were making her go into these sort of trances and making her like growl and do all these crazy things. I'm sorry. I can't help but laugh when I think about it. But it was something. You have to go and watch that. But then it went a step further because Ruby came to Kevin and said that she would now have to sleep in Jodi's room with her because she had to be there for her friend, because at night the attacks would get worse from the demons and she had to pray over her. She had to be there to comfort her friend. Cherie actually talks about this in her book. She basically said that her mom was more than just friends with Jodi. And when I read that, I was like, I knew it. I knew it. And Cherie actually mentions this again in the docuseries. She believes that her mom and Jodi had a romantic relationship. And this was just the beginning of the end for the Franke family. Soon Ruby told Kevin that she wanted a separation. He could still live in the house and he could leave when he wanted to. But if he wanted to come back, he had to ask for permission. I was like, what? That is insane. And I'm trying to picture me telling my husband something like this, and I can't imagine that going down well. And they also discuss this thing that I really never knew. And they say that Ruby actually gave her channel to Jodi. And that to me was just insane. And then Ruby and Jodi went on to form this, I don't know what to call it, but they formed this thing called Moms of Truth. And they were now talking to people online and in person and giving them parental advice. And I just found this to be so hypocritical because these are two people. The one, Jodi, does not even have contact with her own kids. She does not even have custody of her kids, and she's giving parental advice. And Ruby is about to lose her entire family. But Ruby believed she was doing God's work. But actually, she was doing the devil's work. Cherie then goes off to college, and not long after she moved out of her home, her dad phones her and tells her that her mom asked him to move out for at least a year, and this was all Jodi's suggestion. What I found fascinating about this was how indoctrinated Kevin and Chad were. Jodi had them wrapped around her gross little finger. They kicked Chad out too. He was only 17, but he had to go and figure life out on his own. That alone was so shocking to me. He was only 17 and he had to just get out. It sounds to me like Kevin never even thought Ruby was really having an affair with Jodi, but he looks like he is considering it now. But he explains how confused he was when Ruby phoned him and told him the kids were at the police station. She told them that they were possessed and that he should not believe what he hears. And like a puppy dog, Kevin obeys and follows Ruby's orders. Later, he finds out at the police station that Ruby and Jodi had been arrested for child abuse. But let's never forget what his first question to the police were after they told him in what state they found his children.
What's going wife. I love my wife.
I don't know. I'm being honest with you. I don't know. Haven't had any interview with
I
you.
don't know if I've started this against my wife.
Possibly. I think given the circumstances, that's highly appropriate, but again, I don't know your wife. I was hoping to gain some insight from you, but I don't necessarily know that that's something you wanted to,
I trust her.
a road you wanted to travel down with me, so.
He has just been told by police in what state they found his children and what was done to them, okay? And the only thing he cares to ask about is Ruby. How? Another thing I should also bring up is the fact that the kids never got real money for how they performed for the 8 Passengers channel. Ruby actually took all of their savings, except for Cherie. When things started to get weird, Cherie actually thought about it and she transferred her money into an account that only had her name on it, so her money was safe. But all of her other siblings lost out. And I just think it's so unfair. You can't imagine that a mom would work like this with her children. Now we have to move on to the more serious stuff, and this is where Jodi actually gets arrested. And the funny thing to me was when the police knock on her door and she answers, she's literally on the phone with her lawyer already. That tells me she came home, she realized R had escaped, and he's probably gone for help, and that the police would be showing up to her house. She was expecting them. That's why she quickly got on the phone with her lawyer to find out what her rights would be and what would happen. But I also found it so upsetting when they ask her how do they get into the safe, and she says, oh, she doesn't know the code. She's the only one living in that house. I mean, and listen, the injuries that these children had were horrific. I think it is a lot worse than we initially thought. The paramedics actually said that it just smelled like skin and like flesh inside of that ambulance when they were trying to treat little R. When they searched the house, they also found a mixture of cayenne pepper and honey that Ruby and Jodi would put on their wounds to make them burn. And of course, the other thing we have to talk about is how emaciated this child was and his little sister. I mean, they starved these kids. One of the most disturbing parts for me was also when the police spoke about when they found this blue folder next to the bed where I believe Ruby was sleeping in Jodi's house. And it was basically like a journal where she documented all of the abuse. She referred to her children in that journal as demons. And she even says there in one part, and it gave me chills. She says, I will not feed a demon. She also talks about how she shaved her little girl's head, how she made them exercise in blistering heat, how she made them stand outside all day long, jump on the trampoline all day. I mean, just the craziest things. She documented everything. Cherie actually had a falling out with Ruby before all of the arrests and things like that. So she had problems with her relationship with her mom before all of this just went haywire. But she actually goes on to say in this docuseries that she plans on never speaking to her mom again. She has no plans on connecting with her whatsoever. And I completely understand that. And I don't blame her at all. Chad is actually the one that says that he might, later on in life, he will consider it. Cherie also spoke about how she and Kevin were present in the court when Ruby pleaded guilty to 4 counts of child abuse. And she said she saw the tears from Ruby, but because of all the filming they did in 8 Passengers and all the time she saw her mom acting and her crocodile tears, she found it very hard to believe that Ruby was truly remorseful. And then we also have to talk about the similarities between Jodi, Ruby, and Chad and Lori Daybell. And it's crazy because they are all Mormons, and Chad actually comes from Springville, Utah. But there's this one clip where it actually shows Ruby talking about her kids and calling them zombies. And that instantly took me back to Chad and Lori. And I really believe that if little R didn't escape that day, that we would have been looking at a case that is more like Chad and Lori's. So I'm very grateful that R was brave enough to get out of that house and to get help for him and his sister. And then the ending was extremely heartbreaking for me. I was listening to Kevin and I can't help but be mad at him. I still wonder how he was not charged. I really, really do. I feel that he should be charged. But I was listening to him talk about Ruby, and they were asking him, because he said he's getting divorced from her, but they were asking him, do you still love her? And he said yes. And when he explained it, I really understood what he was saying. He has all of these memories. He has 6 children with this woman. He remembers all the births of his children. He remembers all the happy times, when things weren't so weird, when they used to laugh together. There's so much that goes on in a marriage. Tomorrow is my 12-year anniversary. And there's a lot that has happened in 12 years. And I can only imagine that, God forbid, if anything happened, I would be looking back thinking, how did it get to this? Because back then we were so happy and I still have all these good memories. And it's very difficult to just switch from being in love with someone to hating them. And I honestly get that. I understand what he's saying there. But at the same time, I feel that he is also responsible for what his children went through. He should have been there for them. He shouldn't have just walked away because Jodi said so. But the one thing I wanted to add that I forgot to say was, it was interesting to me that after he went to the police station and found out what happened to his kids, his neighbor, he actually went back to their family home, and Chad went there too. And his neighbor came over and told him more stuff. And he said that's when he started coming out of the brainwashing. He said he was so brainwashed that even after he spoke to the police, that he didn't think this was true. But slowly but surely, he started to realize that Jodi and Ruby did awful things and that he really couldn't defend her. But yeah, that was my very unprofessional opinion on the docu-series, The Devil in the Family. And I wonder, do you think they are referring to Jodi or Ruby when they say the devil in the family? I actually think they are referring to Jodi, but I guess it could work either way. But thank you so much for tuning in and for all of your support. I really appreciate it. Make sure that you take care of yourself, your loved ones, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.